She needs a date to her best friend's gala. He wants to settle down. Can they get past their hang-ups to see that they should be together? This is the premise of The Accidental Swipe by me, Y.M. Nelson. This steamy contemporary romance features Jason and Fortune, two people who've given up on love and are urged to use an online dating app to find someone. When they find each other, the attraction is undeniable, but their jaded outlooks on love based on past emotional hurt may keep them from getting together. The Accidental Swipe releases on July 25th, 2023. Go to ymnelson.com for all of the latest details. This is the Nerdy Romantics Podcast, and I'm your host, Y.M. Nelson. In this episode of our Who Gets an HEA series, we celebrate Black love by recommending a few Black romance novels and a couple of series. These are just a few of the many romance novels with Black main characters. For a full list of books from this episode and from future episodes delivered to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at ymnelson.com/subscribe. Now let's get into the show. All right, Nerdy Romantics. This episode is a little bit different than what we usually do, and that in our Who Gets an HEA episodes, we're going to do some book recommendations. And with me, we have Marcie, Staci, who you know, and we also have a new guest host, Jen Grayville. All right, Jen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a book coach and a freelance editor, and that means that I work directly with romance authors every day to help them take their books and their business to the next level. So I get to talk about all kinds of stories and really kind of dig in deep. So it's cool.
Awesome. This audience is, yes, we are mainly readers and nerdaholics too. But we do have a good contingent of writers in this audience too. So with the show notes, we'll have Jen's information in there, whichever information she'd like to share along that line. Let's get into the episode. So today, we're actually recommending a few books and a few series that feature Black main characters. So everybody's got like their own book or their own series. We may chime in on each other's. I'm going to start it off by recommending While We Were Dating. This is part of the Wedding Date series by Jasmine Galori. While We Were Dating is the latest one in her series. It features Anna and Ben, and Anna is she says a B+ list movie star. I would say she's an A-list movie star, in my opinion. She is curvy, which of course y'all know I like curvy, but we'll get into that. And of course, she is a strong, independent Black woman. Love it. Ben is Ben Stevens. So if you have been reading in the Wedding Date series, you met Ben's brother in book 1, because Ben's brother is Theo, who is part of the mayoral office staff there and connected to the female main character in book 1. So Ben is Theo's brother. Theo's book is book 3. And so this is book 6. The way they're meet cute, I guess, is they get together on a commercial. Ben's company is a marketing company, and they are trying to pitch this commercial to a tech company. The tech company has hired on talent Anna Gardner. Basically, she's going to be the talent that's going to sell this phone for this tech company. So that's kind of how they meet. That's kind of how they get together. To me, I think these are great representations of Black people in romance because they're round, not just round characters. They're not stereotypes at all, but they are definitely round characters, and they should be their main characters. But they're also shown as being not just strong, but having a few vulnerabilities. And they're not those vulnerabilities that we see in everyday media, those tired, negative stereotypes that we see. What we do see here, and what I really love about these main characters, is the fact that they are not just of means, but also that they have vulnerabilities that are not necessarily things that are talked about in the Black community, but that are starting to be talked about, I should say, in the Black community, and that should be talked about more. For one, Anna has some issues with anxiety, and that's kind of where we meet her. We kind of meet her kind of at a crossroads. She's just done something really great, and she's actually come from taking a break from doing that really great movie and getting awarded for that really great movie. And she's taken a break. And so that break was actually, she's dealing with some anxiety issues there. With Ben, he's actually dealing with some issues of abandonment and maybe not wanting to be in his father's footsteps. So it's a little bit different take on my father wasn't there. Am I going to end up being in those same footsteps? And do I want to be in those same footsteps? And how do I deal with that? The big thing here is that both of these main characters are going to therapy, and they're okay with saying that to each other, to their family members, and to their confidants. It's a thing we do, like we go to the doctor. And that's not always been the case in the Black community, that we're going to go to therapy. That's not something that we just talk about, like saying, we're going to go to the doctor kind of thing. Or so I like the fact that this is shown. I like the fact that it's done in a healthy way. And I like the fact that these are round characters that show that Black people are not just one stereotype. For those who started with Jasmine Guillory in the first book, we would probably say it was sweet with heat. I think that might be fair to say, because for some reason, I do not remember the wedding date having actual sex scenes on the page. I don't know if any of the guest hosts have remembered this or have read the first book. She didn't necessarily shy away. It wasn't like kissing and then the next morning, they're together. But this is a little steamier than that first book. It's steamier than the first book and the second book, The Proposal, in my opinion. I think what Jasmine Guillory has done is she's gotten a little bit steamier with each book. This one is, as far as heat level, I would probably say this is steamy, especially considering the range and considering what people want, what people define as sweet. I would definitely put this in steamy category because there is sex on the page. She does not shy away from curse words, but it's not anything majorly graphic or anything that is in the erotic level. It wouldn't be necessarily shocking if you read book one and you've been reading along. It's like a progressive thing. If you read book one and then you read book 6 and then you're like, oh my gosh, this is a little bit much. then I can see how that would happen, because to me, the heat level has gone up, we'll say. I think people who like this book are people who love the fake boyfriend trope, because that happens. People who love a good road trip, that kind of dynamic between star and regular person kind of thing. I think people who like that will like this book a lot. Also, another one in this series that features two Black main characters, and it is a Royal Holiday. That's actually book 4. Not going to talk a lot about it, partly because it's not Christmas anymore, and so I'm not in the Christmas spirit anymore. I do want to say that I really enjoyed that book because I like the fact that the main characters are a little bit older than what we normally see. We normally see 20 somethings. Now we're seeing a lot of 30 somethings, but these main characters are in their mid 40s. And I think the guy is in his 50s, but he may be in his late 40s, if I can remember that correctly. We all love a good Englishman. So he's British, and he's one of the secretaries for the royal family. And the female lead, she is coming in from America. So that's how they kind of meet, how that fits. Basically, Maddie, the best friend from Alexa in book 1, that is Maddie's mother in book 4, Royal Holiday. So I also recommend that one too. I love their chemistry, and I love the fun that they have in that book. So let's talk about a few more. How about Jen? What do you have for us? I think I'm going to kind of piggyback on at least one of your suggestions there.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I have so much to talk about. So so I think I'll start off with Real Men Knit.
Cool.
Part of the reason why I was sort of drawn to it, I have to admit, is that I love to crochet, and I loved the idea of it being set in this yarn store, right? So I was like, oh, this will be, and in my head, it was a totally different book. I have to admit, it was a totally different book in my head. So then I get the book and I start reading and figure out what kind of a book it is. And I was just as excited to read it, honestly. I really like her writing. Kwana Jackson is the author. And I really liked the setup that she had here. So the setup is the knitting store is owned by this woman named Mama Strong. And the story starts off shortly after she has died. During her life, she took in foster children and raised them as a family, and they all call her Mama. And even though these boys, I think there's 4 boys, so even though the 4 boys are all grown adults, they still had this very close connection to this foster mother that raised them. And as far as they are all concerned, this is their family the same way that it would be a blood related family. And that spoke so closely to my heart. My grandparents, when I was young, my grandparents would take in foster children, and there are so many that they stayed a part of our family, even after they aged out of the system. And I love seeing that as part of a unit, as part of the way that we support each other as a community. So that kind of spoke to me. The boys are, like I said, they're all grown. They all have their own lives, and they're all kind of, doing their own thing. But of course, they all come back together after their mom has died. She's owned this knitting store in Harlem for whatever number of years. And the big question is whether they keep the yarn store open and try to run it, or if they close it down and, sort of walk away. One of the boys, Jesse, wants to keep it open. And God love him, he's the one that maybe doesn't quite have his act all together at this point in his life. I love the fact that his brothers give him a hard time about that. And they do kind of remind him that he needs to kind of get things together. Our heroine in this book is Carrie Fuller. Carrie is working part-time at the knitting store and part-time at the local community center, and she works with children. Because she worked in the knitting store and has worked there for a number of years, she also has this wonderful, connection to Mama Strong. And so the book really, it starts off, they're all kind of together. They're all sort of in this space together, all the brothers. There's a little bit of logistical discussion that needs to happen about, who's going to do what and how this is going to go. And as you kind of get a little bit further into the story, there's these moments where our two main characters have to deal with their grief. We don't see a lot of grief in romance novels. We don't see a lot of grief being processed in most media because it just makes everybody sad. But when you lose somebody that is so important and such a big personality, to have them gone from your life and to feel, especially a parental figure, to feel that bit of being untethered, alone in the world, even though you know that you're surrounded by other people that love you. When you lose that very important person in your life, there's so much sadness and there's so much grief, and that grief can come at you in a lot of different ways. So I loved the fact that this book was able to deal with such a heavy subject like grief, but also frame it with, brothers giving each other a hard time. We have a wonderful situation where Carrie she lives on her own. She lives in an apartment. There is some plumbing issue, I believe, at her apartment building, and the entire building has to be evacuated, and she's going to be homeless for a week until they can get everything figured out. And of course, the only place that she can go is to Mama Strong's house, where she would have a room and she can stay there. And so we have this wonderful forced proximity. We have so many tropes that are represented in this book, and so that just makes it so much fun. So if you love a forced proximity book, there's a little bit of this is the best friend's sister, or the sister's best friend type of a situation, where you have these four boys and Carrie have all sort of been around each other. They've all grown up in the neighborhood together. They've all spent so much time in this knitting store. And so while she's definitely friends with the other brothers, there's always been a little bit of a thing between her and Jesse. And so we get a little bit of that type of a dynamic of the big brother saying, don't you touch my little sister sort of feeling to it. So that's always a little fun. But the place where this book, and Jesse in particular, kind of grabbed my heart, because there's this scene, it's dark, kind of end of the day. Carrie comes into the store looking for him, and she finds him on this raised platform in the yarn store. He's kind of gotten into his feelings, and he's just sort of feeling some things about life and about the future and about his mom. He's sitting up there knitting. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know that I've ever read a book where the extremely attractive, total player guy also has a knitting habit, and that's sort of how he works through his feelings, is sitting there with his yarn and his needles, and the two of them sit and knit together and they just talk. It's such a beautiful little piece of life to know that when you're hurting and there's people around you that love you, that you can do that and you can be part of that. But yeah, the scene of this very fit, very strong Black man with his knitting needles, just
wow.
I know, it was very sweet. That was a very sweet scene, folks. Anyway, so so I would say this book, there's not a lot of sex scenes in it, but the one or two-ish that are in there, they get pretty steamy. So it's kind of, I think he called it sweet and steamy, and that's what I would say that it is. Some folks actually even call this book a slow burn, which I can definitely understand that. There's a lot that happens. Like I said, these two they've known each other for a long time, and they've sort of danced around each other for a while, but neither one of them are really in the mindset of being in a place where they want to just jump into bed with each other, because they have this grief that they're also trying to deal with. So there's a little bit of that as well. Right. So it was great.
Cool.
The other book I want to talk about, and the one I think you want to piggyback off with me, is A Cowboy to Remember, not The Cowboy, A Cowboy to Remember by Rebecca Witherspoon, which is part of her Cowboys of California series that she's been doing. Rebecca Witherspoon is one of those ladies that she She writes such a great book. I always have a good time when I read a Rebecca Witherspoon book. So there's lots of other ones that she has in her backlist, but this was a new to me series, but it is a contemporary romance starring a family of Black cowboys. But the kicker for me is that these are fairy tale retellings, right? They're
Yeah.
inspired by. They're
Inspired by, yes. That's probably the best word to say, because
yeah.
they're not
They're not like, they don't go like beat by beat for what happens in a fairy tale, but that is one of my catnip things. I love a good fractured fairy tale, sometimes they're called, where you sort of like get inspired by and use little elements of it. So this one I think is a Sleeping Beauty story, is what she's inspired by, because we have Evie, who is a celebrity cook that lives in New York City. She's on television and doing a cooking show and the whole bit. She goes to a big holiday party. This is a book that's set around Christmas, New Year's type of a time frame, but for reasons that will become obvious, there's not too much of a Christmas feel to it. So what happens right before Christmas is that she goes to this big party. Her grandmother had died about 10 years before this, and she still struggles a bit at the holiday time, because when her grandmother died, that was her last living relative. So she's sort of been going through life on her own, and she's gathered some wonderful people around her. She has a wonderful best friend. She has some wonderful people that she works with. But when it comes right down to it at the holidays, and you don't have family to be around, that can be really difficult. And her grandmother, who partially raised her, was the person who turned on Christmas music as soon as possible. And so when she's listening to the Christmas music during this Christmas party, it's just kind of making her sad. And she's supposed to be bubbly, and she's supposed to be smiley, and she's supposed to be all these things, and she's just kind of struggling with it a little bit. So she sort of gets away from the party. I think they're in the New York Public Library, something like that, like some sort of like big space that's available to them. So she kind of gets away, goes up the stairs so that she can just sort of have a moment. And she runs into a rival chef. They had been on a competition show together. That rival chef is awful and rude. Things get said. And the end of that chapter is that as Evie is walking away and going to go down the stairs to go and be back part of go and rejoin the party, that chef pushes her. The next thing that we see from Evie, she has been lying in the stairwell. She has a head wound, so there's a lot of blood, and she ends up in the hospital, and she's in a coma for a few days. So it's very dramatic. Not to spoil this, but Evie does survive. It's okay. But she wakes up with amnesia, and she doesn't remember who she is or where she works, and she doesn't know how to cook. So they're kind of in this situation where, again, she doesn't have close family, so trying to figure out what to do. But her assistant knows that she has an emergency contact, some folks that she knew in California, the cowboys. Her grandmother and their grandmother were best friends, and so they all lived on this ranch together during her teen years. So once she's released from the hospital, she's able to go back to the ranch so that she can heal. If she stays in New York City, it's going to be a problem, because she has no memory of people or places. And if she is out on the sidewalk, people are going to recognize her. She's just that famous. So she goes to this ranch where she can kind of hide and heal and work on getting her memory back and so forth. So that's kind of that's the setup. There's one of the brothers, Zach, that when they were young, there were definitely some feelings there. She was definitely falling in love with him. And when she told him, he pushed her away and said, no, you should go to culinary school and go live a big life and not be here on the ranch and all that kind of thing. And it broke her heart. So she has not spoken to him in 10 years. And now she has to go and hang out with him. So the struggle here, though, is that she doesn't remember this fight. She doesn't remember why they're not speaking. And when he sees her, he immediately is like, oh my gosh, Evie's back. Evie's back. I have missed her so much. And you kind of get the feeling that he has not been able to have a romantic relationship, like a real, strong romantic relationship with anyone. His brother kind of teases him about being quite the player. And that maybe that's because he's just been in love with Evie his whole life and nobody else will ever replace her. And that's kind of sweet. That's just a real sweet, little heartwarming thing. You have this big bad cowboy, who's super, super charming and quite the player. And then you find out that he has this soft little heart. Okay. Again, more catnip for me.
And it's just so interesting how like them together when she has lost her memory is so cute and sweet.
Oh my gosh, it really is.
Oh
It's
gosh.
so sweet. I love that he's trying so hard to be good, but one of the things that she doesn't remember is that she doesn't remember what sex is like, and she doesn't know what certain terms.
Yeah, that's the cleanest way to say that.
Yeah. And so she doesn't remember like innuendo. She can speak English just fine. Like her language centers are fine, but she doesn't necessarily understand slang. Slang doesn't really
right. Especially new slang.
So and so she's like, well, this guy is kind of safe. Like, I don't know if I want to go back to New York City and like not know what sex is. So it's something it is so sweet and so sort of innocent isn't the right word, but there's a little bit of innocence there. And it's very sweet.
It is.
Guy.
It totally is. But the thing that I remember the most about this particular book is the grandma Miss Leona.
Oh my God. Don't you want a Miss Leona in your life?
Yes. Some of us had a Miss Leona. Oh, I did. I had one. Yes, I had a Miss Leona. She is something else. She's like, okay, y'all. She's serious about everything. But at the same time, she's definitely nurturing. She's like, everybody come into the house and cooking and all of this stuff. It's just, but at the same time, you don't cross Ms. Leona. You do not mess with her. Yeah.
You are going to follow her rules.
That's right.
And oh gosh, that scene, there's a phone call between them towards the end of the book when Evie just she's had a disappointment. By this point she's left the ranch and she's kind of needs somebody to talk to, and she reaches out to her as a sort of a grandma figure. And then she gets advice as a celebrity Black woman,
right?
Instead, or both. She actually gets both.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh my gosh, yes, this is the person. So I don't think we mentioned that Miss Leona is a very famous actress.
Oh yes, right. Like Academy Award winning actress. Yes.
And then Zach's father is also a famous actor. Zach's brother is a famous actor. So there's a whole family of celebrity in this. And so it gives them a certain insight and understanding to what it means to be a Black celebrity, which I think is lovely. But those scenes with Miss Leona when she can be both that professional contact, that mentor advisor, all the way down to being that soft grandmotherly figure that you just sort of want to feel her giving you a hug, and it just makes for a really, really lovely and satisfying read. Sort of hit a lot of different key points there.
Yeah, it did. To piggyback on that, so I did read book 1, obviously, but I also read book 2 in this series, and book 2 is If the Boot Fits. And this one is inspired by Cinderella. I won't go into a lot since we've already talked a lot about the series, but this one features the brother, Sam, the brother who's the actor, and he has just won an Academy Award. As we enter this book, he's waking up with this woman that he calls Miss Cha-Cha because they dance together. Just woken up from a one-night stand. We don't see the one-night stand, of course, but basically has woken up from a one-night stand. the whole series, I think the one thing that I want to say about the series, and especially about representation, that really got to me, I guess, and is the fact that we see not only these celebrity level Black people, but we also see Black cowboys, which we don't see a lot. For my generation, when we were growing up, we had the big movie Posse. That was like our movie with, with Black cowboys in it. Now they've done the Netflix movie. Remind me what the name of it is. The Harder They Fall. Yes.
Yes, it's The Harder They Fall.
Yes,
yeah.
a historical.
So we see very few representations. We'll say in Hollywood, we see very few representations of Black cowboys, and there are a lot of Black cowboys out there. And these Black cowboys know how to rodeo. How about that? They do rodeo shows. I'm like, yes. I'm all for this. I want to see this on the big screen. Do this on the big screen, please. We need more of this. Netflix, absolutely. I'm talking to you.
Exactly. Yes.
We need to see more of this there. And two, I guess this one kind of piggybacks on While We Were Dating a little bit too for me, because we've got an award-winning celebrity who is pitted against, or who is getting together with, somebody who's an assistant in the industry, and she actually wants to be a writer and has written some fan fiction of a show. She's written a lot of things, but one thing that they mention in this book is that she's written some fan fiction of a show. And y'all, it's a nerdy show. It's a sci-fi like show that she's written. She's like, I want to see people on the screen doing XYZ in space, or, ABC in space. I mean, she's like this, sci-fi kind of, so it's just like, all of these little wonderful, yummy things in this book all come kind of together here. The other thing that, it just is funny to me that it happens because, as we know, award season is Oscar night is in February. So, right. Of course, this is around Valentine's Day that this book is happening. It's funny because Sam is inviting her to the ranch for a weekend just to kind of like get away, and he doesn't realize that it's Valentine's Day. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I'd be doing something like, what, Valentine's Day? Yeah, that would be me. Yeah, these books are hilarious. To me, I would put these in the romantic comedy category, definitely. I think they're solidly romantic comedies. Also, I listened to this series on audiobook. So that was kind of fun too. And there is a book 3 out, and that is with the older brother, Jesse. But it just came out, I think, at the end of last year. So I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but I totally recommend these. So what did you say the heat level was for this, Jen?
So I think this is another one. I think this is another one that I would put in the sweet, steamy category, because there's not a lot of sex scenes in this. Right. I think there's only one. There's a couple makeout sessions, and then there's one scene with naked times. So
right.
Naked time.
I mean, yeah, they're open door, but like, right, they're not a lot of sex scenes. There's like one, yeah, and I think there was like one in if the boot fits as well. So, if you're solidly in the sweet, clean romance area, this is not for you. These people do have adult language and you do see adult times, but you don't see a lot of them if you're okay with that. While we're talking Western and while we're talking out West, Staci, how about tell us about Forbidden?
Okay, well, Forbidden is my book that I've read, and it's from Beverly Jenkins. As you know, that I really wasn't a big romance reader until, I'll occasionally read romances, but for me, romances were more like a palate cleanser because I would read stuff that was more dark, and it's like, okay, I need to read something light. But this was suggested. Marcie, you suggested this. I was a little bit skeptical at first because I typically didn't read romance novels, but this is a historical romance novel, and it's Black historical romance. And I'll be honest, if you told me about like, hey, you want to travel back in time, being Black is like where I'm going to go to the 70s. That's about as far back as I really would like to go. So
right.
reading, when I get a romance novel, it's a historical romance, and then you have Black historical romance, like, okay, how's this going to go? But it was actually a really great read, and they've kind of moved it out. Like I said, it's out west, and the two main characters is Edie, and Edie Carmichael is the heroine, and she reminds me of Tiana from the Disney movie.
Yes,
The Princess and the Frog.
The Princess and the Frog.
Yeah. Sorry, I did not see the movie.
And Tiana, yeah.
Tiana, yeah.
But because she cooks and she wants to, have something of her own. And then you have Ryan Fontaine, and I think that is about as romance hero kind of name as Fontaine as you can get.
I know.
So he is actually Black, but he's white passing. So he's actually passing. And so when you read the book, he's passing and he's basically being a success. He's, made a name for himself. He has money. He has basically getting the things that he thought he wanted in life. But he's doing that by basically passing as white. She comes in is kind of destroying not destroying, but he's reconsidering what he wanted because he knows if he wants to be with her, the only way he can be with her is to actually come out. I like that because they have that connection and they are having an attraction, but at the same time, they're fighting it. And it's not one of those, because she doesn't want to be a kept woman. And so, and because she doesn't know that he's passing, that he's white, that they could marry. She doesn't know that. And so she's like, yeah, I might feel attracted to him, but what does love have to do with it? I mean, she wants what she wants out of her future, which is a stable life, love on equal terms. And at the time, she thinks that she won't be able to get that from him. And you do have some of the aspects of them being Black in that time for her, especially her being Black. And then later on, when we find out if he actually is going to say that, he's going to actually come out and state that he is Black to everyone. Why is it, that there are things that are going on in the world that, it's going to make life and heart difficult, and they still manage to get together and they still manage to have a connection. And I really enjoyed that. I mean, it was a surprising read because I'm going to be honest, I did not think I was going to like it, but I really enjoyed it. And watching them, that miscommunication, I think we've talked about this. If you only just had one good conversation, all of this would be solved.
Exactly.
And that's what you just tell her. She already knows. This can all be solved just like that. But that whole miscommunication thing, the whole thing through for most of it until they finally admit, that's something that, even though I think just have one good conversation, I enjoyed that they didn't, and that there was miscommunication. Right. And because of that added to the story. Really, when I think of stories, all stories are the same in a way. There's always, you already know how the story's going to go. For most romance books, for most murder mysteries, you know how it's going to go. Someone's going to, people are going to get together, criminals going to be found, but is that story good enough? Is that story interesting enough to have me keep reading it for the whole length of it? And this book met that. I finished the book and we know that there are some books that we read that I didn't finish. So
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah.
that I did indicate to me that was
Sure.
a good book. The only thing I say negative about it for a romance novel, it was more of the, I want to say sweet steamy, but sweet teasing, because it's like that
Yeah.
was it. What have you
Right. So that
Right.
I think the term going around now is called sweet with heat.
Okay,
So
so
we
I guess
like
it's
we know
sweet with
stuff
heat.
happened, but we don't see none of that stuff actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, then that's what it was.
Then it
There's an
was sweet
implication
with
that
heat.
things happen, but
Yes. Right.
Implication, and if it's like, oh, that is, and then it's like that was it. We could have gone into. It was just definitely sweet with heat, but I was calling it sweet and teasing. So, but overall, it still kept me going to read it to the very end. And to kind of prepare for this, I was trying to reread it a little bit, and I was like, gosh, I really do need to read the next part of the series, because there is several novels of this, and Marcie would probably know more details of it. That I was like, oh, I might just keep and find the others on Kindle if I can and read the rest of the series.
I did read the rest of the series, and it was interesting, and you do find out more about Ron and his family and his legacy and what being with Edie, how he evolved from their story to some others. Yeah, so I do think it's worth reading the rest of the series.
Okay, well, that's good to hear.
Does it stay with Ron and Edie, or
No,
and
but they
it just
become
goes, or are they standalones, like each
I think,
couple has a
well,
thing?
this sounds like a standalone, but when you read it, they're referencing people like his sister. I was like, oh, that's probably gonna be another story, and they reference
Okay.
like his brother.
So
I mean, there's stories like that, so you know that there's an out or some. They can have another book, and they don't necessarily have to read the other books to get it, but they will probably reference them. But Marcia can probably give you more on that.
right, so they appear in the characters cross and they appear in other stories.
Yeah.
But at different points in time, sometimes at the point in time of part of the story that you already read, but sometimes not. And so it's interesting to see how they show up. But you can read them as standalones and you don't necessarily have to know their backstory. But it's fun if you do to then see them show up in another story.
Do
Because when you look at the types of businesses they own and that kind of thing, then you start to see the evolution of the story and of the landscape of the history that she's telling along with this romance.
Doc and Sylvie, do they get their own story?
Doc and Sylvie do get their own story. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I gotta read that then. Oh. So I did go and read, because this was one of the ones that was on my TBR, and I kept picking, and I noticed on my Goodreads that I kept picking this one up and reading part of it and putting it back. And I think part of it is I kind of feel like Staci a little bit. It's like when we talk about Black people in the this was like in the Reconstruction era, like the 1860s, 1870s. And it's like, this is before the Klan just overtook. Like the Klan was just starting to like take over then. And it's like, oh, do I really want to put myself through this kind of thing?
Because
I say
yes. Because this
It's so
is a period and she is telling the story from Black empowerment. So yes, you want to read these stories because yes, these are the stories of the towns that we built and the newspapers that we ran and the Black female doctors, Black cowboys and Black lawmen and Black business owners. Yes, you want to read these stories because they are in that gap that gets so lost in the history of destruction. But what about all that we built? And so one of the things that I love about these stories is the context and the history behind it really does inspire you. And then to see how she flipped that to modern day in the Blessing series and brought these same stories to life, but connected them to the now. I think Beverly Jenkins as a storyteller did an amazing job there in connecting these two periods in time. And I think she'll change your mind and readers like you about reading her historical genre, and then visiting her and seeing more of that in her contemporary with that Blessing series as well.
And that's why Miss Bev is the GOAT. Everybody knows it.
That is why Miss Bev is the GOAT. Yes.
Absolutely.
But I will say about this one, I did manage to finish this one, and it did give me that it's exactly like what Marcie is saying, because it's in that period that was like right after the war, where Black people were actually being able to explore what it is to live in American society and actually be a part of that society. And we were building cities, y'all. We were building cities, and especially out west, where we, made me think about Black Wall Street, when I was kind of reading this. I mean, it's not in that state. This is Virginia City, Nevada. But what I actually found interesting is, and two, what kind of bothers me some about when people get a little, there are some historical romance readers out there, y'all know who y'all are, who like to nitpick about the history of things. And first of all, you're reading a novel. This is not, specific to exactly what happened to to somebody. But the second thing is, people research, especially Miss Bev. I mean, the woman was a librarian, for goodness sakes. So people research, and what I really like here, and I want to ask if this is done, if she does this in all of these, or is it because people wanted to see this story happen with Ryan? But she was talking about Virginia City, where this story is set, where Forbidden is set. And she actually got the idea from the story by actually seeing an article about an archaeological dig that they did, where they found Virginia City, Nevada, and they found these things at Virginia City, Nevada. And she was talking about the history of it at the end, referencing some actual historical, some actual articles, about Virginia City. And, and I thought, wow, that was neat. It's like she took that piece of real history as her foundation and built the book on this. But it kind of made entertaining, but also I learned something at the same time.
Exactly. And I think
it's
that
so
was
great. And I feel like if I were in that time, I'm glad I'm not, but if I were in that time, I feel like I could actually do it. I could actually make it.
Because that's funny, because one of the stories is about a newspaper. So I really think you should read that one. I've read them also. Now I don't remember which story that was, but there's one about a newspaper reporter, and that was pretty interesting. And so as a writer, I think you'll find that one interesting. But she did leverage the history of Virginia City. If you look at her Blessing series and you look at the connection to her historical romances, you'll see that she re-envisioned that town. And so I think that's also something to again, where she brings and the July family, which is one of the families in some of her novels, and she takes them out of the historic and brings them into their ancestors and into the now. So I think it's another one of those where, once you get invested in these, but the history and the storytelling is really it's really interesting, and that there are all these different kinds of romances. And I think the other thing that is really fun about her historicals is that there are all different kinds of female leads and female male-female relationships, and who's attractive and how, and those kinds of things. So I think that's also kind of fun to look at as well. You got really strong women characters. You got women characters who are who are a bit more fragile, it appears, until you get to know them better. You got to read them.
Yep. Yeah. And speaking of series with a lot of families and a lot of different portrayals of us, not just one portrayal of us, Marcie, tell us about Iris Bowling and the Heart series.
All right, so my offering and my suggestion is Iris Bowling and the Heart series. And Iris Bowling is an author out of Virginia, and she actually started writing while she was still working her corporate career. And the thing that drew me to this series and these characters is that they were both everyday people and extraordinary people. And what I mean by that is that they were people you could meet on the street that are approachable in their character makeup, but also we're talking about someone who is going from district attorney to mayor to the governor to president. Like we're talking about Tracy, the female character in the core relationship, and she is genius level smart. Started a business with her best friend when they were still in college that is a technology company, basically, that is hugely successful. When she meets JD, you have these powerful characters coming together. She doesn't have the finesse that he does, because again, she comes from this tech background and of being really smart and not necessarily being perceived as what beautiful is. But in JD's, as he's looking at his wife and what his helpmate looks like, he's like, she's it. She has everything that you would need if you were going to end up being president one day. And then their circle of friends, the connection between JD and Tracy is his sister Ashley, who is Tracy's best friend. His circle of friends, Brian and that group, and then her circle of friends with Ashley. As the story evolves, there are more characters that come in and out of the stories, but it grips you from the beginning. It's definitely romance. There are relationships of all kinds. There are relationships that come together. There are some that fall apart, and then the person gets that happily ever after. I think that's another thing that I appreciated, was that some of the stories weren't quick and easy. Some of them took some evolution of the people in order to get to their happily ever afters. So people do in her stories get them, but they're not always easily obtained, which I think is the truth of relationships. So I do appreciate that as well. The characters are engaging. There'll be some you hate. I will not lie. There are some you're going to hate. There are some that you're going to love from the beginning. There are some that you're not going to be sure about, because in different scenarios, it's like anything you're not sure where they're coming from. So you're not, especially if you've aligned yourself with another character, then you're like, I don't know how I feel about it. Like, you get personally invested. The way that she writes, I feel like you can get invested in these characters, especially because these stories span these series. And so sometimes you're like, I want to fight her. But 2 stories later, you'll be like, oh, okay, well, I still don't know if I love her, but I don't want to fight her anymore. Like, it's like that. But the love stories, we're talking Black love, we're talking these core characters who establish this relationship and take it all the way, who raise families and try to instill these things in their children. And then the relationships that are rocky, although there are not, it's not the stereotypical kinds of things, but there are some people in these novels who are definitely from the streets, but where they've evolved to by the time you meet them is quite interesting in and of itself. The dynamic between Tracy and her brother, Alday, and their relationship, and how those interpersonal relationships then span out into their own stories is really nice. You get to see love evolve, and again, strong characters, different types of relationships, different types of perceptions of what is strong, what is womanly, what is the homemaker version versus the person who's working constantly. All the different dynamics of family, of relationships, of genuine love and acceptance of people and their flaws. I think it's something that her stories really capture, like the parts of people that make you want to choke them, but also you love them. So trying to evolve for the sake of love.
Yeah, and see, that's what I think that all of these selections, but especially with that series, it sounds like we see an evolution. And if we do see something that's stereotypical, we're not looking at that as a two-dimensional character, that those people are going to evolve, or that person or that character is going to evolve, and we're going to see something different from that character.
Yes. And when you're tempted, and when you're tempted by description to stereotype, then when you see this character speak, then you're like, wow, that's not what I expected. So I think she does that in a really lovely way.
I
also think so. The Heart series was where she started, but she introduced characters in each of those stories, and some of them are the people that surround JD and Tracy in their political and work life. Out of that came an offshoot of another family. And so you have the Heart series, and then tangential to that series, but woven through it in a lot of places, is this series that she called the Gems and Gents. And they are Joe and Sally Lassiter's children. And Joe and Sally have been married forever and have a million kids. I think there's like 12 or 13 of them. And so all the sons are named after biblical names, and those are the Gents. But all of the daughters are named after precious stones, and they are the Gems. So you have Joshua, you have Samuel, you have Jade, you have Sapphire, who goes by fire, you have Ruby, you have Opal. And so throughout these stories, you would hear about them in the Heart series, but then once we got invested in them as characters, their love stories and the evolution of their families became the Gems and Gents series. While you can read the Heart series as standalones, it's also fun to read it and then to get a Gems and Gent in between that kind of gives you glimpses into the story, but also tells you a whole lot more about those characters and how they got to the places there that are mentioned in the Heart series. It's really nicely done the way she does it, but it's all these variations of love stories of all kinds, of young love and Sally and Joe, and mature love, and Tracy and JD's evolving love. But then you also have second time around love, and you have so it's a bunch of different versions of love, and it's interesting to see it. And I think she does a really good job of weaving that into amazing stories with intrigue and plot twist and crossing countries and all kinds of, explosions and and so I would say that it is there are some stories that are steamier, but then there are a few. The Heart series probably started off milder, so it's probably not until you get to the later parts of the series that they get a little racier. The Gems and Gent ones probably are middle ground to really racy, depending on who the character is, because some of them it just fits the vibe of the character. Like there's going to be a level of steam that just comes because Joshua is Joshua, and if you know, then you know. So it just really depends on the character. There's a little less steam when you see Fire, but that's because she's the youngest in the series. But so there's a lot of implication and innuendo, but not as much like actual
on page,
like on the page, but
on the page sex.
But the relationship evolution for Fire and her person is just is worth every time you meet her. Like every time you any story that she enters the pages, you're like, yeah, I gotta follow her. It's for anybody. It's for anybody who loves a good story. It's for anybody who loves a good romance. It's for anybody who, when I say mature love, I'm talking about, widows. I'm talking about divorcees. I'm talking about secret children. There's all kinds of relationships and all kinds of types of love. You'll be looking at 2 or 3 different relationships happening at the same time and crossing over. And then sometimes you get like a little novella that has like one couple's just their story, but they overlap. But it's a beautiful, to me, landscape of Black love, of successful people, especially, but not so successful that they're removed from the everyday and the plight of regular people. So again, approachable, but also inspirational and aspirational.
Oh, which is good. So do you have a favorite of the Heart series or the Gems and Gents series? Or you just like them all?
I mean, it's really hard for me to choose a favorite because it's my favorite until I read the next one.
Yeah.
Because in every one, I feel like you get to see her evolve as a writer, but also see these characters evolve. I love Ashley and James's story. So The Heart of Him is probably one in the original Heart series. In the Gems and Gents, it's hard. It's hard because they're not done yet. There's still some Gents and Gems to be stories to come. It's really tough because
it sounds like it is.
Because everyone it takes it to the next. Yep. I would be remiss. Joshua, for the Gems and Gents, Joshua's book 1 and 2, always a winner. But also Samuel's story. I can't remember the name of it, but Samuel's story with Cynthia, who we meet in the Heart series, is a pretty fun one. They're an interesting couple. So their dynamic is pretty interesting. So
hey, Marcie,
I'll probably say that. Mm-hmm.
Is this a series that should be read in order? So do we start with the first one, or do we or can we just pick up any one?
I would start with this because it is a series. Mm-hmm. I think it should be read in order. So I think you start with
a serial
the Heart
kind of series.
Yeah, I think you start with the Heart series, book 1, once you touch the Heart. The Gems and Gents kind of evolved as offshoots. So they kind of have an order of their own. So the first one in the Gems and Gents is Teach Me. Awesome. And so I will say that they're not in the order of the children. So they don't go first child, second child. But their stories kind of intertwine in a way. So it's kind of But love definitely it. for the Heart series, you want to read it in order because otherwise you will miss the nuances of from story to story that kind of connect the thread of the main story. That is the intrigue. That is so you'll be completely lost if you get to the re-election and you haven't read the ones before it, because there's so many building blocks that she's laid along the way that you won't. When they're talking about characters, you won't know who's what and why it matters. So definitely read them in order.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like we've touched on a lot here, but we've only touched on a handful of books that qualify as just great Black love stories. Everybody go out there, get your hands on these books, and continue to discover the wonderful world of Black love stories. Thank you so much for listening. And guest hosts, thank you so much for putting in your recommendations.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode. Please subscribe to Nerdy Romantics Podcast wherever you get your podcast to be notified anytime a new episode drops. And if you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. The links are in my show notes at ymnelson.com, along with a lot of other links for books and other items that we talked about on our show. And if you really like what you're hearing, click the Buy Me a Coffee button while you're there to support us. Thank you for listening.